The financial regulation bill is now law, and while we know that the 2,300-page document is full of new bureaucracies and regulations, you may not know there's actually language in this law that requires racial profiling. Peter Flaherty is president of National Legal and Policy Center, an ethics watchdog based in Washington. They've done some digging into this bill. Peter, you know, I couldn't believe when I first heard it. I mean, this is an administration that prides themselves on being anti-racial. They are against racial profiling that doesn't exist, for example, in the Arizona immigration law. But get this. Lenders will now, there's a new data collection system that has to be now instituted as a result of this law. Lenders will now be required to report if small business applicants are minority owned. That is racial profiling. You are going to be forced to say whether you are white, black, Latin, whatever.
That is correct. This provision ended up in the bill due to the efforts of Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Now, she denies that it will impose racial quotas on lending, but if you have this data being collected, being demanded of lenders, the result is going to be the same. One institution would submit numbers to the government that could be used as the basis for a charge of discrimination. What's really kind of puzzling to me, David, is how this provision stayed in the bill. The bill that was signed today was only passed due to the support of Republicans from the Northeast, Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe from Maine, and Scott Brown from Massachusetts. Right. It seems to me if they demanded that this thing be taken out, it would not have been a deal killer for the Democratic leadership, but nonetheless, it's in there.
I am bothered by racial profiling, and this kind of racial profile where the government insists on people naming their race. I mean, forget about it. I would protest. I would not do this. I would take it to court and demand an explanation of this. By the way, it's not the only place where they require racial profiling. The Financial Stability Oversight Council, that's the big kahuna, the one that decides whether a financial institution stays or is broken up. And I got a lot of problems with that. Big government, talk about Big Brother coming in saying who's good or bad. But it requires, again, that word requires, to consider an institution's, quote, importance as a source of credit for low-income, minority, or underserved communities before winding it down. Therefore, in other words, if you've got a bad bank, and if you're a minority-owned bad bank, you get considerations that a white or whatever bank doesn't get, right?
Well, what's this mean? If you have a lot of lenders or a lot of borrowers who are in default and they happen to be black or Hispanic, you can't close down the bank. It's really an indictment of one of the central features of this bill, and that's the resolution authority vested in this Board of Overseers. The overseers are going to be captured by the big banks if politics intrudes. And this is the first sign that politics will intrude. In fact, it's been institutionalized because it's in the bill even before the ink on the bill is dry.
How did this stuff get in there?
Maxine Waters put it in and probably was as surprised as the rest of us that it stayed in there.
Well, I mean, you say Scott Brown should have put up a fuss and two of the other Republicans also, but I mean, we needed to know about this before it went in. Now, that part of the reason why it's so dangerous to put legislation in that, frankly, most of the Congress people haven't read is because stuff like this can be stuck in there, and it's not until after it becomes law that we find out about it. Is it too late to go in there and rip it out of the law?
Well, it's too late now, but what we saw was this phenomenon where you give the federal government more and more power, and special interest groups, both in Congress and outside Congress, will seek to put their imprint on it and use the power of the federal government to impose an agenda that's separate from the main purpose of the bill, which is federal regulatory reform.
It's racist. The idea, I mean, I keep thinking of Dr. King's statement, judged by the content of character, not by the color of the skin. This is directly opposed to that. Directly opposed to that.
Not only that, this is what got us into this financial mess in the beginning.
Precisely.
The Community Reinvestment Act required banks to lend money from where they get deposits, which sounds good in theory, but the way it was enforced was that banks had to show that they did a lot of lending in minority communities, whether the borrowers were qualified or not. Of course, the banks wouldn't make these loans otherwise, but they had the ability to just turn around and sell them to Fannie or Freddie 1 week later so that the risk was put on the government, and now taxpayers are stuck with multi-billion-dollar liabilities for both of those institutions.
You know, just imagine again if the situation was reversed. They were saying, you know, we had to favor another group of racial preferences instead of the one preferred from this particular bill. I mean, this is absolute racial profiling, something the administration claims to be against, but they put it in a financial regulatory bill. Did you ever think this would happen?
No, I did not like the financial regulatory reform bill for a number of reasons, but this is really the razor in the apple. This was completely unexpected. There is a dry run for what's going to happen. There's a bank in Chicago called Shore Bank,
right,
which has good political connections with the White House. It's run by acolytes of Saul Alinsky. It styles itself as serving the unserved. They're deep underwater. The FDIC wants to liquidate them, but the White House has been putting pressure on other big institutions like Goldman Sachs and Citigroup to lend
and they
Shore
have
Bank
lent,
money
and
so
now
that it can
now they qualify for TARP money. I know. We've covered it before, but it's really outrageous. Peter Flaherty, good to see you, Peter. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Appreciate it.